Welcome to EDU World Space.
So, for this question, we're supposed to find the chi-square left and chi-square right values when we're given the alpha value and sample size. So, just for reference, I have written here chi-square left is the chi-square 1 minus alpha by 2 value, and chi-square right is chi-square alpha by 2 value. So, let's begin. For part A, we've been given alpha is equals to 0.05. We've been given the sample size n is 12. The first thing we do is find the degrees of freedom. Degrees of freedom is basically the sample size minus 1, and in this case it would be 11. Now we find the alpha by 2 value. So we have alpha as 0.05, so alpha by 2 would be 0.05 divided by 2, which would be 0.025. 1 minus alpha by 2 would become 0.975. So using the chi-square table, now we can find the chi-square left and chi-square right values. Chi-square left value would basically be chi-square 0.975 with degrees of freedom 11. And if you check the table, this value would be 3.816. The chi-square right value would basically be chi-square 0.025. Chi-square right would be chi-square 0.025 with degrees of freedom 11. If you check the table, this value would be 21.920. So here we found the chi-square left and the chi-square right values. Putting them in a box. These are the chi-square left and chi-square right values for part A. Now let's use the same method for parts B to D, B to E. For part B, we've been given alpha is equals to 0.10. N is 20. Degrees of freedom would become 20 minus 1, which would be 19. Alpha by 2 would be 0.05. And 1 minus alpha by 2 would be 0.95. So now we find the chi-square left and chi-square right values. Chi-square left here would basically be chi-square 0.95 with degrees of freedom 19. If you check the table, this value would be 10.117. And for chi-square right, we basically find chi-square 0.05 with degrees of freedom 19, and this value would be 30.144. So here we have the chi-square left and chi-square right values for part B. Let's move to part C. For part C, we've been given alpha is equals to 0.05. Sample size n is 27. Therefore, the degrees of freedom would become 27 minus 1, 26. We find alpha by 2. Alpha by 2 here would be 0.05 divided by 2, which would be 0.025. 1 minus alpha by 2 would be 1 minus 0.025, which would be 0.975. 0.975. Now we find the chi-square left value, chi-square left, which is basically chi-square 0.975 with degrees of freedom 26. This value would be 13.844. And chi-square right would be chi-square 0.025 with degrees of freedom 26. This value, chi-square right, would be 41.923. 3. Now we found the chi-square left and chi-square right values for part C. Let's move on to part D. For part D of the question, alpha has been given as 0.01. The sample size n is 6. Thus, the degrees of freedom becomes 6 minus 1. Oh, sorry. The degrees of freedom becomes 6 minus 1, which would be 5. Alpha by 2 here would be 0.01 divided by 2, and that would be 0.005. 1 minus alpha by 2 would become 0.995. Now we have alpha by 2, 1 minus alpha by 2, we have the degrees of freedom. Let's find chi-square left and chi-square right values. Chi-square left again would be chi-square 0.995 with degrees of freedom 5. If you check the table, this value would come to 0.41. Chi-square right would here again be chi-square 0.005 with degrees of freedom 5. And if you check the table, this value is 16.750. So these are the chi-square left and chi-square right values for part D. Let's move on to part E. For part E, alpha is 0.1. The sample size is 41. Thus, the degrees of freedom becomes 41 minus 1, which is 40. Alpha by 2 here is 0.1 divided by 2, which would be 0.05. 1 minus alpha by 2 here would be 0.95. Now we find the chi-square left and chi-square right values. Chi-square left is chi-square 0.95 with degrees of freedom 40, which is 26.509. And chi-square right would be chi-square 0.05 with degrees of freedom 40, which would be 55.5758. My bad. It's 55.758 for chi-square right. So there we go. That's how you find the chi-square left and chi-square right values.